For 35 years, I dedicated my life to building a secure future. I wasn't pursuing wealth or status symbols, just making careful decisions, saving diligently, and planning for a retirement where I wouldn't burden anyone. Then one afternoon, my son-in-law Marcus handed me a glass of water and casually asked about my life insurance policy. That single question unraveled everything I thought I knew about family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I moved to Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago after Harold passed. It wasn't the retirement community of my dreams, but the modest 2-bedroom condo felt like a sensible choice at 72. Close enough to visit my daughter Eliza and her husband without being intrusive. Far enough to maintain my independence. The neighbors were pleasant, mostly other widows and retirees who nodded politely when we collected our mail or tended the small garden plots allotted to each resident. "Mother, you really should consider moving in with us," Eliza had suggested at Harold's funeral reception. "That house is too big for you to manage alone. Besides, Lily and Connor would love having their grandmother around." I'd declined then. My husband of 47 years was gone, but our memories lived in every corner of our Cape Cod home. The kitchen where we'd hosted decades of Thanksgiving dinners. The oak tree in the backyard where Harold had built a swing for Eliza when she was 6. Leaving felt like abandoning him all over again. But as months passed, the silence grew heavy. The furnace broke in the middle of winter, the roof started leaking, the stairs became harder to climb. Eventually, I sold the house, our house, and downsized to Willowbrook. Harold's life insurance had left me comfortable, not wealthy. Between that, our savings, and my teacher's pension, I could manage without worry. Or so I thought. Eliza and Marcus visited every Sunday without fail. They'd bring the grandchildren, a homemade casserole, and update me on their busy lives. Marcus with his accounting firm and golf club membership. Eliza and her interior design business that seemed to consume most weekdays and some weekends. I treasured those visits, marking days off my calendar, preparing cookies for the grandkids, straightening up as if the queen herself were coming to tea. "Mom, you should get one of those medical alert buttons," Eliza would say, eyeing my perfectly functional rotary phone. Or, "We found this wonderful assisted living place just 20 minutes from our house. They have activities every day." I'd smile and change the subject. I may have been in my 70s, but I wasn't ready to be packed away just yet. Then last. "Spring," Eliza called on a Tuesday. "Mom, our basement flooded. The contractor says it'll take weeks to fix, and the insurance won't cover a hotel that long. Could we possibly stay with you? Just until the work is done?" Of course I said yes. My children needed me. What kind of mother would refuse? They arrived with suitcases, laptops, and the children's school schedules taped to manila folders. I moved. Into the guest bedroom, the smaller one with the lumpy mattress that aggravated my arthritis, so they could have the master suite. The grandchildren shared the pull-out sofa in the living room. Within days, my quiet, orderly condo transformed into a whirlwind of activity. "Thanks for breakfast, Mother," Marcus would say, barely looking up from his phone as he grabbed his keys, leaving dishes in the sink. "Don't wait up," Eliza would call, rushing out to client meetings that stretched well into the evening. I found myself watching the grandchildren after school, preparing dinners that accommodated everyone's preferences, washing mountains of laundry, and trying to maintain some semblance of order in a space designed for one person, maybe 2, certainly not 5. Weeks turned into months. The basement repairs encountered complications. Pipes needed replacing. Mold had been discovered. The timeline stretched like taffy. "Just a little longer," Eliza would promise whenever I gently inquired about their progress. "We're as anxious to get home as you are to have your space back." But their actions told a different story. Marcus had his mail forwarded to my address. Eliza began replacing my simple white dishes with her colorful ceramic set. The children enrolled in the local school district. My carefully curated life was being erased inch by inch. "Did you see this bill, Martha?" Marcus asked one evening, holding up my electric statement. "It's nearly doubled since we arrived. We should talk about splitting utilities more fairly." I stared at him. They'd moved into my home. I was cooking their meals, cleaning their clothes, caring for their children. And now he wanted me to pay more for the privilege? "I think things are fine as they are," I said quietly. "After all, this is temporary." His smile tightened. "Of course, just looking out for everyone's interests." But something in his tone made me uneasy. That night, I couldn't sleep. The conversation replayed in my head, along with dozens of other small moments that had felt off. The way Marcus inspected my mail before handing it to me. How he'd offered to help with my online banking. Eliza's sudden interest in my mother's antique jewelry collection. The next afternoon, I was sorting through insurance paperwork at the kitchen table when Marcus came home early from work. He spotted the papers, poured himself a glass of water, then brought a second one to me. "Anything interesting?" he asked, his voice casual as he gestured toward the documents. "Just annual policy reviews," I answered, taking a sip. The water was cold and refreshing, but something in his expression made me feel suddenly parched. "I've been meaning to ask, did Harold leave you with decent life insurance? With inflation these days, so many seniors find themselves underinsured." The question hung in the air between us. Not, "How are you feeling?" or "Can I help with anything?" but a direct inquiry about my death benefits. I set down my glass, my hand suddenly unsteady. "Harold made sure I'd be taken care of." Marcus nodded, pressing further. "But what are we talking about? Term? Whole life? Ballpark figure?" As your son-in-law, I should probably know these things, for planning purposes. Planning purposes. As if my death were a business transaction to be optimized, that's when I knew. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't family helping family. This was calculated. They hadn't moved in because they needed shelter. They'd moved in because they wanted mine, and apparently, whatever might come after I was gone. I forced a smile, gathered my papers, and excused myself to rest. But inside, something hardened. A resolve I hadn't felt since my early teaching days, when I'd faced down school board officials who thought a woman couldn't handle the troubled boys' class. That night, I lay awake in the too-small bed, staring at the ceiling. My life had been built on caring for others. First my students, then Harold and Eliza, now my grandchildren. I'd always found purpose in being needed. But being used, that was different. As dawn broke, I made my decision. No confrontation. No accusations. Just a clear-eyed plan to reclaim my life before it was too late. Starting tomorrow, Martha Kavanaugh would no longer be a doormat. She would be a force to reckon with. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I didn't confront Marcus that morning, or the next. Instead, I watched and waited, gathering evidence like a detective building a case. The way he subtly checked my prescription bottles in the medicine cabinet when he thought I wasn't looking. The hushed conversations between him and Eliza that abruptly stopped when I entered the room. Even the helpful suggestion that I add his name to my checking account, just in case something happens. Each observation was a puzzle piece, revealing a picture I'd refused to see. They weren't planning for my well-being. They were planning for my absence. The realization didn't break my heart. It hardened it. On the third day after the life insurance conversation, I called my old friend, Patricia. We'd taught together at Greenfield Elementary for 20 years before retirement pulled us in different directions. She'd moved to Silver Pines, a senior community 2 towns over, after her Frank passed away. "Martha, is everything all right?" Patricia's voice crackled over the line. It's been months. Actually, no, I admitted, keeping my voice low. I was sitting in my car in the Safeway parking lot, away from prying ears. I need some advice. And possibly a favor. I told her everything. The extended stay that showed no signs of ending, the financial probing, the gradual takeover of my home and life. The words tumbled out in a rush, all the concerns I'd been too embarrassed to voice before. Those ungrateful vultures, Patricia hissed when I finished. I always thought Marcus had a calculating look about him. Remember at Eliza's wedding how he kept asking about your summer cottage? I did remember, though I'd dismissed it at the time as simple conversation. The cottage in Maple Lake had been Harold's pride and joy, a small wooden structure on the water that we'd purchased when land was still affordable. We'd spent every summer there until Harold's health began to decline. What are you going to do? Patricia asked. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I need some space to think clearly. Away from them. Come stay with me, she offered without hesitation. I have a guest room with a decent mattress and no one calculating your life expectancy at the breakfast table. I hesitated. I couldn't impose. Martha Jean Kavanaugh, Patricia cut in firmly, using my full name like she used to do when we disagreed about faculty meeting agendas. This isn't an imposition. This is a rescue mission. That afternoon, I told Eliza I was going to visit Patricia. For a few days. Just a little girl's getaway for two old friends. She barely looked up from her design magazine. That sounds nice, Mom. Will you be back by Sunday? Marcus is grilling his famous steaks. I'm not sure, I said vaguely. We might. Go up to Maple Lake. Check on the cottage. That got her attention. Her head snapped up. The cottage? But you haven't been there in years. Is everything okay with it? Just feeling nostalgic, I suppose, I said with a shrug. Your father loved that place. Her expression shifted. Concern, but not for me. For the property, the asset. Do you want Marcus to come with you? He's good with maintenance issues. No need, I said, patting her hand. Patricia's son-in-law is a contractor. He'll look things over for me. I packed lightly that night after everyone was asleep. Just 2 suitcases, one with clothes, another with important documents. My marriage certificate, birth certificates, Harold's military service records, the deed to the cottage, insurance policies. I also took the small lockbox from the back of my closet containing my mother's jewelry, and the emergency cash Harold had always insisted we keep on hand. You never know when you might need to leave in a hurry, he'd said. My practical, forward-thinking husband had been right, though neither of us could have imagined the circumstances. As I closed the suitcases, my gaze fell on the family photo on my nightstand. Eliza's college graduation. Harold and I flanking our beaming daughter in her cap and gown. We looked so proud, so certain of the future we'd secured for her through decades of careful saving and sacrifice. What had happened to that bright-eyed girl who'd once written me handmade Mother's Day cards proclaiming me the best mom in the universe? I left the photo behind. Whatever answers it held weren't ones I was ready to face. Patricia was waiting when I arrived at Silver Pines the next morning, her silver hair freshly styled, a plate of cranberry scones on her kitchen counter. Welcome to freedom, she announced, taking one of my suitcases. Temporary freedom, at least. Her apartment was smaller than my condo, but meticulously organized. Framed watercolors, her retirement hobby, brightened white walls. A small balcony overlooked a garden courtyard where residents gathered for morning Tai Chi. It's lovely, I said, meaning it. It's peaceful, she corrected. There's a difference. Now tell me what's really going on while these scones are still warm. Over tea and pastries, I laid out my suspicions more coherently than I had on the phone. The basement flood that conveniently never seemed to get fixed. The gradual colonization of my space. Marcus's increasingly pointed questions about my finances. I think they're waiting for me to die, I said finally, the words sounding both ridiculous and terrifyingly plausible. Or at least become infirm, enough that they can take over everything for my own good. Patricia didn't laugh or dismiss my fears. She'd been a teacher too long to discount intuition. "What does your lawyer say?" she asked. I stared at her blankly. "My lawyer? The one who handled Harold's estate. Surely you consulted someone when they moved in, or adjusted your will after they started acting suspiciously?" My silence was answer enough. "Oh, Martha," she sighed. "You need to protect yourself, legally." "No," I admitted. "I just never thought I'd need protection from my own daughter." "Family can be the worst predators," Patricia said quietly. "They know exactly where to strike." That afternoon, Patricia drove me to see Gregory Winters, her estate attorney. His office occupied the second floor of a Victorian converted to professional spaces, with creaking hardwood floors and tall windows that let in dappled light through old oak trees. Mr. Winters was younger than I expected, perhaps in his late 40s, with prematurely silver temples and wire-rimmed glasses. He listened without interruption as I explained my situation, taking occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Kavanaugh, your situation isn't uncommon," he said when I finished. "Elder financial abuse often begins with a gradual erosion of independence. The fact that you recognized the pattern is already putting you ahead of many clients I see." "What should I do?" I asked. "I can't just throw them out. They're still my family." "Family or not, you have rights," he replied, firmly. "First, we need to secure your assets. Then we can discuss how to reclaim your home, if that's what you want." For the next 2 hours, we developed a strategy, a comprehensive review of my finances, new accounts at a different bank, a revised will with specific conditions, powers of attorney assigned to a neutral third party. Mr. Winters explained each step patiently, never speaking down to me or rushing my decisions. As Patricia drove us back to Silver Pines, I felt both exhausted and oddly energized. For weeks, I'd been reacting to Marcus and Eliza's manipulations, retreating, accommodating, doubting my own perceptions. Now I had a plan, not just to escape, but to fight back. "You know they'll call soon," Patricia warned as we pulled into her parking space. "Once they realize you've taken important documents." "Let them," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I'll be ready." That night, in Patricia's guest room, I slept better than I had in months. No muffled conversations from the next room. No grandchildren's electronics beeping through the night. No sense of being a guest in my own home. My phone rang at 8:17 the next morning. Eliza. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 8:22, then 8:30. At 8:45, she texted, "Mom, getting worried. Please call ASAP." I texted back a brief response. "Having a wonderful visit with Patricia. Don't worry about me." Then I turned off my phone and joined Patricia for breakfast on her small balcony. The morning sun warmed my face as we sipped coffee and watched the Tai Chi group below, their movements slow and deliberate, each stance flowing into the next with quiet purpose. "They make it look so easy," I remarked. "Finding balance." Patricia followed my gaze and smiled. "It's not easy at all. It's disciplined. And you're learning the same thing, Martha. How to stand your ground while remaining flexible enough not to break." As I watched the elderly practitioners move through their ancient dance of resistance and yielding, I understood what she meant. This wasn't retreat. It was strategic repositioning. And for the first time in years, I felt the power that comes from choosing your own stance. 3 days into my stay at Silver Pines, my phone practically vibrated off Patricia's coffee table with incoming calls. Eliza had progressed from concerned to frantic, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate. "Mom, please call us back. We're worried sick." "Mother, this isn't like you. Are you sure you're okay? We're thinking of filing a missing persons report if we don't hear from you soon." Marcus called too, his messages a study in calculated concern. Martha, we respect your independence, but Eliza is beside herself. Just let us know you're safe. Your grandchildren are asking for you. Connor has a science project he wants your help with. Martha, I hate to mention this, but did you take some important papers with you? We were trying to sort out some insurance matters and couldn't find the policies. The last message confirmed what I already suspected. They'd been searching my belongings, not out of concern for my whereabouts, but to locate the documents I'd removed from their reach. Patricia listened to the messages with me, her expression growing stormier with each one. The nerve, she muttered. Filing a missing persons report? You told them exactly where you were. They're establishing a paper trail, I said, surprising myself with how clearly I saw through the tactic. If they can document erratic behavior, it helps their case later. For what? You're perfectly competent. But would a judge see it that way? A concerned daughter and her husband versus an elderly widow who disappeared with important documents? Patricia's face darkened. We need reinforcements. That afternoon, Patricia invited several friends to her apartment for what she called an emergency council of war. Vivian arrived first, a retired nurse with shrewd eyes and practical wisdom earned from 40 years in emergency rooms. Then came Eleanor, who'd been an administrative assistant to 3 different college presidents and knew more about institutional power dynamics than most executives. Last was Robert, a widower and former high school principal who still carried himself with the straight-backed authority that had intimidated generations of teenagers. They settled around Patricia's dining table as she served iced tea and explained my situation. I filled in details where needed, still feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and relief at sharing my predicament openly. Disgraceful, Vivian pronounced when I finished. But unfortunately common. I saw this pattern with elderly. Patients all the time. Family swoops in during vulnerability, then gradually takes over. The question is, what do you want, Martha? Robert asked, his principal's voice still commanding attention. To cut ties? Or set boundaries? I don't know, I admitted. They're still my family, my grandchildren, who you may never see again if they succeed in isolating you, Eleanor pointed out gently. Sometimes the harder path preserves more options long-term. Your attorney gave you good advice about securing your finances, Vivian said. But this isn't just about money, it's about your autonomy. They were right, of course. This small group of relative strangers understood what was at stake better than my own flesh and blood. As they discussed strategies, legal, practical, emotional, I felt something long dormant stirring within me. Not just anger or determination, but community, connection, the realization that I wasn't facing this alone. Martha needs allies beyond just us, Robert said after we'd talked for over an hour. People who can witness and validate what's happening. I suggest reconnecting with other friends, neighbors, anyone who might have observed the situation. The condo association president at Willowbrook is Diane Mercer, I recalled. She always seemed fair-minded, and she noticed how crowded my unit had become at the last community meeting. Perfect, Eleanor nodded. Document everything through neutral. Third parties. And your doctor, Vivian added. Schedule a checkup. Get your competency clearly noted in your medical records before they try suggesting cognitive issues. By the time they left, we had compiled a detailed plan with specific action items. Patricia typed it up on her laptop, printed copies for each of us, and tacked one to her refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a gavel. Consider us your personal defense team, she said with a fierce smile. The Silver Pines Justice League. The nickname stuck. Over the next week, the Justice League helped me implement our plan methodically. Robert drove me to a new bank where I opened accounts solely in my name. Eleanor accompanied me to the county records office to check that no liens or changes had been filed against my properties. Vivian went with me to see Dr. Feldman, who documented my excellent cognitive function and wrote a letter stating I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. We also investigated the Maple Lake Cottage situation. Robert and I drove out Wednesday afternoon to inspect the property. The small lakefront cabin appeared untouched, just as Harold and I had left it 3 years earlier. Dusty but intact, with family photos still lining the pine-paneled walls and Harold's fishing gear hanging from hooks by the door. "Beautiful spot," Robert commented as we stood on the weathered dock overlooking the water. "I can see why your husband loved it." "It's not fancy," I said, "but it was our sanctuary. Harold always said it was the best investment we ever made." "Have you considered moving here instead of going back to the condo?" he asked. "It would be a clean break." I gazed across the sparkling water, considering the possibility. The cottage would need work to be year-round livable. Better insulation, updated heating system, reliable internet, but it was paid for. And it was mine. "Maybe," I said. "But first, I need to make sure they understand I won't be pushed aside." That evening, I finally returned one of Eliza's calls. Her voice was sharp with relief and irritation when she answered. "Mom, where have you been? We've been worried sick." "I told you, I'm visiting Patricia," I replied calmly. "We decided to extend our little vacation." "For a week? Without telling anyone? That's not like you at all." "Perhaps you don't know what's like me anymore, Eliza. People change. I'm certainly not the same person I was before your father died." Her breath caught at my directness. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different?" "I'm fine," I assured her. "Better than I've been in months, actually." "How are things at the condo?" "Chaotic without you," she admitted, a note of calculation entering her voice. "The kids miss you terribly, and honestly, I'm struggling to keep up with everything you usually handle." The manipulation was so transparent now that I'd learned to recognize it. My absence had inconvenienced them, not emotionally but practically. They missed their housekeeper, their cook, their free childcare provider. "I'm sure you'll manage," I said. "After all, it was supposed to be temporary, remember? Just until your basement was fixed." Silence stretched between us, taut as a tripwire. "About that," she finally said. "The contractor found more issues. It's going to be at least another month." "I see," I replied, my voice neutral. "Well, I've been thinking it might be time for you all to find alternative arrangements regardless. I'm considering some changes." "Changes?" Alarm sharpened her tone. "What kind of changes?" "Nothing for you to worry about right now. We can discuss everything when I get back." "When will that be?" she pressed. "I'm not sure yet. I might go to Maple Lake for a few days first, check on the cottage." "The cottage again?" Her voice rose slightly. "Mom, that place is falling apart. You should really think about selling it. We could help you list it." "I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my property," I interrupted firmly. "I'll let you know when I'm coming back. Give my love to the children." I ended the call before she could protest further, my hands trembling slightly but my resolve intact. Patricia, who had been pretending not to listen from the kitchen, abandoned the pretense and joined me on the couch. "Well done," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "You laid the groundwork perfectly." "She'll call Marcus immediately," I predicted. "They'll start planning their next move." "Let them," Patricia said with a dismissive wave. "We'll be ready." That night, I sat on Patricia's balcony watching the stars emerge above the courtyard. The same stars that had witnessed my entire life, teaching career, marriage to Harold, raising Eliza, retirement, widowhood, and now this unexpected battle. How strange that at 72 I was discovering parts of myself I never knew existed. The capacity to recognize betrayal, the courage to stand against it, the wisdom to build new connections when old ones frayed. My phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Appointment confirmed with Dr. Feldman for cognitive assessment, 10 a.m. tomorrow. I'll pick you up at 9:30. Another message followed from Eleanor. "County records clear. No lines or unauthorized changes to any properties. Then Robert. Bank accounts transferred. New cards arriving next week to my address as we discussed. I smiled as I read each message. My Silver Pines Justice League, this unexpected alliance, of retirees who had become my defenders and strategists. Whatever came next, I wasn't facing it alone. And for the first time since Marcus had handed me that glass of water and asked about my life insurance, I felt something like hope. After 2 weeks at Silver Pines, I knew it was time to return to Willowbrook. Not because I missed my condo, Patricia's guest room had become a comfortable sanctuary, but because avoiding confrontation wouldn't solve anything. My Justice League had helped me secure the legal and financial groundwork. Now I needed to reclaim my physical space and establish new boundaries face to face. Are you sure you're ready? Patricia asked as she helped me pack my suitcases the night before my planned return. You could stay longer. If I don't go back now, it only gets harder, I replied, folding a sweater with deliberate care. Besides, I miss my things, my books, my garden. I shouldn't have to abandon my life because they've decided to commandeer it. True enough, she conceded. But remember our agreement. Daily check-ins, no exceptions. And if anything feels wrong, you call Robert immediately. I nodded, grateful for their protective instincts, but determined to handle this on my own terms. The Martha who had left Willowbrook 2 weeks ago, confused, intimidated, unsure, was not the same Martha returning tomorrow. I had a plan, legal protection, and most importantly, clarity about what was happening and why. That evening, the entire Justice League gathered for a final strategy session. Robert brought Chinese takeout. Eleanor arrived with a folder containing copies of all my new financial documents. Vivian contributed a freshly baked coffee cake and practical advice about staying calm during confrontation. Remember, your blood pressure is the priority, she cautioned. Don't let them bait you into harmful stress. Deep breaths, tactical pauses, and if necessary, simply walk away. And keep your phone on you at all times, Robert added, handing me a small device. This is a voice-activated recorder. Legal in this state as long as one party, that's you, knows the conversation is being recorded. I pocketed it, hoping I wouldn't need such measures but acknowledging the reality of my situation. My own daughter and her husband had been systematically attempting to undermine my independence. Evidence might become necessary. I've drafted a formal letter establishing a timeline for them to vacate your property, Eleanor said, passing me another document. Gregory approved the language. You don't need to present it immediately, but having it ready gives you options. We reviewed every aspect of my return and various scenarios that might unfold. By the time they left, I felt as prepared as possible. For the confrontation ahead, Patricia drove me to Willowbrook the next morning. The April sky was clear, flowering trees lining the streets in explosions of pink and white. As we approached my condo complex, I felt a flutter of anxiety despite all our preparation. You don't have to do this alone, Patricia reminded me, squeezing my hand as she pulled into a visitor spot. I can come in with you. I shook my head. I need to establish the new normal from the start, but thank you for everything. She helped me unload my suitcases, gave me a fierce hug, and reluctantly departed. With a promise to call later, I watched her car disappear around the corner before wheeling my luggage toward my unit. Diane Mercer, the condo association president, was watering flowers near the community mailboxes. She spotted me and waved. Martha, you're back. We missed you at the garden committee meeting last week. I paused to chat, deliberately establishing my presence and normalcy in case Eliza or Marcus tried suggesting my behavior was erratic later. Just took a little vacation with an old friend, I explained cheerfully. How are the planning going? For the summer block party? We discussed community events for several minutes before I continued to my condo. Each interaction was strategic now, creating witnesses, establishing patterns, building a protective network of neighborhood eyes. I used my key to enter my own home without knocking. The sound of the television came from the living room, along with the distinctive tap of Marcus's laptop keyboard. The air smelled of burnt toast and neglect. He looked up, startled, as I wheeled my suitcases through the door. "Martha, we weren't expecting you today." "Obviously," I replied, taking in the scene. My once immaculate living room was littered with empty coffee mugs, discarded newspapers, and Marcus's work files spread across my antique coffee table. "I see you've made yourself comfortable." He quickly gathered some papers. "Just catching up on work. Let me help with those bags." "No need," I said pleasantly, keeping him at a distance. "Where are Eliza and the children?" "School event for Connor. They'll be back around 4. He studied me with barely concealed calculation. "We were getting worried when you didn't return our calls." Eliza was quite upset. "I needed time to think," I said simply, wheeling my luggage toward the master bedroom, my bedroom, and make some decisions. I opened the door to find the room completely transformed. My simple floral bedspread replaced by Eliza's modern duvet. My reading chair moved to make space for Marcus's exercise equipment. My dresser cluttered with Eliza's makeup and jewelry. "We thought you might be more comfortable in the guest room when you returned," Marcus explained, appearing in the doorway, behind me. The kids were making too much noise near the smaller bedroom, disrupting their school focus. "Hope you don't mind the swap." I turned to face him, my expression neutral despite the fury building inside me. "Actually, I do mind," his smile faltered. "Sorry?" "This is my bedroom in my home," I stated calmly. "I'll be sleeping here tonight." "But we've already moved everything." "Then you'll need to move it back," I interrupted, my voice firm but controlled. "By this evening." Marcus's expression shifted from surprise to something harder. "Martha, be reasonable. The kids are settled in their routine. Changing things now would only upset them." "I understand change can be difficult," I replied, consciously, echoing the patronizing tone he often used with me. "But this arrangement isn't working for me anymore." A flash of anger crossed his face before he masked it with concern. "Is everything okay? You seem different since your trip." "Eliza and I have been worried about these sudden changes in behavior." There it was. The first attempt to suggest I was becoming unstable, just as we had predicted. "I'm perfectly fine." "Marcus, in fact, I've recently had a complete cognitive assessment with Dr. Feldman." I smiled pleasantly. He was quite impressed with my mental acuity for someone my age. The mention of a medical evaluation clearly caught him off guard. "That's good to hear." "Yes, isn't it? I've also been reviewing my financial and legal affairs, making sure everything is in order." His expression tightened further. "Any particular reason?" "Just good planning," I said lightly. "Now, about my bedroom. I'd like it restored to its original condition by tonight. We should probably wait for Eliza before making any changes," he hedged. "This isn't up for discussion or committee vote, Marcus. This is my home. I'm simply informing you of how things will be moving forward." He stared at me for a long moment, clearly reassessing the situation and his approach. The compliant, accommodating Martha he'd expected to return wasn't standing before him. "I'll talk to Eliza when she gets home," he finally said, his tone carefully neutral. "Thank you," I replied with a polite nod. "I'll unpack in the meantime." As soon as he left, I closed the door and took a deep breath, my heart racing despite my outward calm. The confrontation had gone as anticipated. His attempts to make me question my own judgment, the subtle implication that I was being unreasonable, the deference to Eliza as if major decisions in my home required their joint approval. I unpacked methodically, reclaiming dresser space by moving Eliza's things to one side. Then I sat at the small writing desk by the window, the only piece of furniture they hadn't rearranged, and wrote a detailed account of the interaction in the journal Robert had suggested I keep. Date, time, exact quotes as best I could recall them. By the time I heard Eliza's car in the driveway, I had composed myself and prepared for the next round. The front door opened, followed by the children's excited voices and the thump of backpacks hitting the floor. "Grandma's back!" Connor shouted, spotting me as I emerged from the bedroom. Lily flew across the room and wrapped her arms around my waist. "We missed you so much. Did you bring us presents?" I hugged them both, their genuine affection a balm after the tense exchange with their father. "No presents this time, but I missed you too." Eliza stood watching, her expression a complex mix of relief and wariness. "Mom, you're back." "As promised," I replied evenly. "We thought you'd call first," she said, an edge in her voice suggesting I'd somehow violated protocol by returning to my own home unannounced. I decided spontaneity was in order. I answered with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Children, why don't you go wash up? I need to talk to your parents for a few minutes." Once they'd scampered off, I gestured toward the living room. "Shall we?" Marcus and Eliza exchanged glances before following me. I took my favorite armchair, the one Harold had always called the throne because of its commanding position in the room. They settled uncomfortably on the sofa across from me. "I've made some decisions during my time away," I began without preamble. "It's time we discussed your living situation." And with that opening statement, I launched the conversation that would either restore balance to my life or sever the remaining threads connecting me to my daughter's family. Either way, I was prepared. "First," I said, my voice steady as I faced Eliza and Marcus across the living room, "I want to clarify that this is my home, not our home. My name is on the deed, the mortgage is paid in full, and I've never agreed to any permanent living arrangement beyond temporary emergency housing." Marcus shifted uncomfortably while Eliza's expression hardened. "Mom, we know it's your condo. We've never suggested otherwise." "Actions speak louder than words," I replied evenly. Moving my belongings from the master bedroom, rearranging furniture, without consultation, forwarding your mail here permanently. These aren't actions of temporary guests. "We were just trying to make things work in a small space," Marcus interjected, his tone conciliatory but his eyes calculating. The arrangement seemed sensible given the circumstances. "The circumstances have changed," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "I've drawn up a formal agreement outlining a reasonable time frame for you to find alternative housing. 30 days should be sufficient." The silence that followed was deafening. Eliza's face flushed with color while Marcus went perfectly, still like a predator reassessing its approach. 30 days, Eliza finally sputtered. "That's impossible. The basement repairs still aren't complete. We're in the middle of the school year, and rentals in this area are impossible to find on short notice." "Perhaps you should have considered that before allowing the temporary situation to stretch nearly 6 months, I suggested. "I'm not unsympathetic to your challenges, which is why I'm offering 30 days rather than immediate eviction." "Eviction?" Marcus echoed, his voice rising slightly. "Martha, we're family, not tenants. Which is precisely why I hoped we could handle this amicably without legal intervention." I held his gaze steadily. "But I'm prepared to pursue formal proceedings if necessary." Eliza leaned forward, her expression shifting to the wounded look she'd perfected since childhood, the one that had always melted my resolve in the past. "Mom, where is this coming from? I don't understand. We've been living together harmoniously for months, and suddenly you disappear for weeks and come back with eviction notices?" "Harmoniously," I repeated, allowing disbelief to color my tone. "Is that how you describe an arrangement where I've been relegated to the smallest bedroom in my own home? Where I cook, clean, and provide childcare while being gradually excluded from decisions about my own property?" "That's not fair," she protested. "We've been contributing what, exactly?" I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. I've covered all utilities, groceries, and household expenses since you arrived. I've provided free childcare that would cost thousands monthly. What exactly has been your contribution? Marcus stepped in, adopting the reasonable tone he used in negotiations. Martha, clearly there's been a misunderstanding about expectations. We can discuss a more equitable arrangement, perhaps a formal rent agreement or division of expenses. That might have been an appropriate conversation 6 months ago, I acknowledged. But at this point, I simply want my home and my life back. And what about the children? Eliza demanded, playing her strongest card. They adore you. They've grown accustomed to having you here. How can you just disrupt their lives like this? The question stung as intended, but I'd anticipated it. I love Connor and Lily dearly, and that won't change regardless of our living arrangements. I'll continue to be part of their lives, but as their grandmother, not their live-in caretaker. This is absurd, Eliza declared, standing abruptly. You can't possibly expect us to find suitable housing and relocate an entire family in 30 days. I'm open to discussing a reasonable extension if you demonstrate good faith efforts to find alternative housing, I offered, but I'm no longer willing to maintain the current arrangement indefinitely. Marcus stood as well, placing a restraining hand on Eliza's arm. Let's all take some time to calm down and consider options rationally. Martha, you've clearly been upset about things we weren't aware of. Perhaps we should revisit this conversation tomorrow when everyone's had time to process. His attempt to delay and diminish my position was transparent. My position won't change overnight, Marcus, but I agree that you both need time to consider how to proceed. The formal notice is on. The desk in the guest room, which is now my bedroom again. Eliza stormed out without another word, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, followed by the sharp slam of a door. Marcus lingered, studying me with newfound wariness. Something happened during your time away, he observed quietly. Someone's been advising you? Several someones, actually, I confirmed with a small smile. It turns out I have more resources than you anticipated. He nodded slowly, recalculating. I see. Well, we should talk about practical matters. The life insurance. Policies you took with you. We'll need those back for safekeeping. No, you won't, I replied calmly. My financial documents are exactly where they belong, under my control. And speaking of finances, I've opened new accounts at a different bank. You'll need to make other arrangements for any household expenses. Going forward. His expression darkened momentarily before he forced a tight smile. We'll discuss this later, when Eliza's calmer. After he left, I sat quietly in the living room, taking deep, measured breaths as Vivian had advised. The confrontation had gone largely as anticipated. Initial shock, emotional manipulation from Eliza, calculated reasoning from Marcus, then retreat to regroup. Phase 1, complete. I was under no illusion that they would simply accept my terms and peacefully depart. The real battle was just beginning, but I'd established my position clearly, and more importantly, I'd remained calm and firm throughout the exchange. The next morning, the atmosphere in the condo was glacial. Eliza prepared breakfast for the children in pointed silence, banging cabinets and slamming drawers to communicate her displeasure. Marcus had already left, claiming an early meeting. I dressed carefully in one of my most flattering outfits, a robin's egg blue sweater that Harold had always said brought out my eyes, paired with well-tailored slacks. No more shapeless house dresses or faded aprons. This too was strategic, a visual reminder that I wasn't the fading grandmother they could shuffle to the periphery of their lives. Good morning, I greeted the children cheerfully, ignoring Eliza's cold shoulder. Beautiful day for the garden club meeting. Connor looked up from his cereal. Can I come help in the garden again, Grandma? I liked planting those purple flowers last time. Not today, sweetie, Eliza interrupted before I could answer. You have piano practice after school. Actually, I said pleasantly. The garden committee always welcomes young helpers. Connor did a wonderful job with the pansies last month. Diane mentioned how impressed everyone was with his careful planting. Eliza's lips pressed into a thin line. We'll see, she said dismissively. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the small kitchen table. By the way, I've scheduled a consultation with a contractor to evaluate some upgrades I'm considering for the condo. He'll be coming by tomorrow afternoon. Eliza's head snapped up. What upgrades? You've never mentioned wanting renovations before. Just exploring options, I replied vaguely. Modernizing the kitchen, perhaps converting the second bedroom into a proper home office now that I'm getting more involved in community activities. Her eyes narrowed at the implication. I was making plans for a future that didn't include them. Occupying that second bedroom seems sudden and expensive. I have my resources, I said with a small smile. Harold always believed in maintaining property values through strategic improvements. The mention of Harold, and by extension his life insurance and our careful financial planning, clearly struck a nerve. Eliza's gaze dropped to her coffee cup. I should get the kids ready for school, she muttered, retreating from the conversation. Throughout the day, I methodically reclaimed my space and routines. I restored family photos to their original positions, reclaimed closet space by moving their excess belongings to neatly stacked bins in the hallway, reinstated my afternoon reading time in the living room when I would normally have been preparing elaborate snacks for the children's return from school. When Connor and Lily arrived home, I greeted them warmly but directed them to Eliza for after-school supervision. Your mother's handling snack time today, I explained when they looked confused by the change. I have a committee meeting in half an hour. But you always make our snacks, Lily protested. Routines change, sweetheart, I replied, gently. Change helps us grow. Eliza watched this exchange from the kitchen doorway, her expression a mix of frustration and uncertainty. She'd grown so accustomed to my automatic caretaking that its withdrawal left her visibly disoriented. There's nothing prepared, she said accusingly after the children went to their rooms. I'm sure you'll manage, I responded with the same phrase I'd used during our phone conversation. After all, they're your children. The garden committee meeting provided a welcome respite from the tension at home. I deliberately mentioned my extended absence and family challenges to key neighbors, establishing a public record of my ongoing community involvement and mental clarity. Diane was particularly supportive, inviting me to co-chair the summer beautification project, a visible leadership role that further cemented my standing in the community. When I returned to the condo that evening, Marcus's car was in the parking lot. I could hear raised voices as I approached our unit. He and Eliza arguing in hushed but intense tones. They fell silent when I entered, their faces composed into carefully neutral expressions. Martha, Marcus greeted me with forced joviality. We've been discussing the situation. Perhaps we could revisit our conversation from yesterday with clearer heads. I set down my purse and garden committee notes. Of course. What would you like to discuss? We understand your desire for more space and independence, he began, his tone reasonable and measured. And we respect that completely. But the 30-day timeline simply isn't workable with the children's school schedule and our work commitments. What do you propose instead? I asked, already anticipating their strategy. We thought perhaps a more gradual transition, Eliza suggested, her voice carefully modulated. Maybe we could aim for moving out by the end of summer. That gives us time to find something suitable and doesn't disrupt the children's education. 4 more months of occupation. I considered the offer, weighing it against my desire for immediate liberation and the practical realities of family dynamics. I could consider an extension beyond 30 days, I conceded. But I'd need to see concrete progress toward finding alternative housing, not just promises. And our living arrangements would need to change immediately. What kind of changes? Marcus asked warily. I'll be reclaiming the master bedroom tonight, I stated firmly, and we'll need a formal agreement about household expenses, childcare responsibilities, and personal space going forward. They exchanged glances, clearly having expected more resistance to their counter-proposal. The balance of power had shifted. They were now negotiating on my terms, not dictating theirs. We could draw something up, Marcus offered cautiously. Excellent. I smiled. I already have. Copies are on the dining table for your review. The document, drafted with Eleanor's help and reviewed by my attorney, outlined a comprehensive interim arrangement that protected my interests while offering them a reasonable path forward. Their expressions as they scanned the pages told me everything I needed to know. This was only the beginning of our negotiation, but the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. Martha Kavanaugh was back in control of her life, her home, and her future. The interim agreement changed everything. With clear boundaries established in writing, the fog of manipulation that had clouded my home began to dissipate. I had reclaimed the master bedroom. Financial responsibilities were explicitly divided. Childcare hours were scheduled rather than assumed. Personal space was respected, at least nominally. Eliza and Marcus signed the agreement with poorly concealed resentment, but they signed nonetheless. Their alternative was immediate eviction, and we all knew they weren't prepared for that. So we entered an uneasy truce, a holding pattern while they supposedly searched for new housing, and I rebuilt my independent life. I maintained daily check-ins with the Justice League, updating them on developments and receiving their steadfast encouragement. Robert called every evening like clockwork. "Standing your ground?" he'd ask, his principal's voice both authoritative and kind. "Firmly planted," I'd reply, often adding details about small victories or concerning developments. 1 week after my return, I decided it was time to expand my horizons beyond the condo and garden committee. For too long, my world had shrunk to the parameters of Eliza's family needs. Now I would reclaim the interests and connections I'd neglected. Since Harold's passing, the community center near Willowbrook offered a variety of classes and activities for seniors. I studied their catalog over morning coffee, considering options: watercolor painting, Tai Chi, digital photography, local history. So many possibilities I'd never explored. "What are you looking at?" Eliza asked, pausing on her way to the coffee maker. "Class offerings," I replied. "I'm thinking of taking up watercolor painting. Your father always said I had an artistic eye." She looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't know you were interested in art." "There are likely many things you don't know about me, Eliza," I said mildly. "I existed for 50 years before you were born, and I've continued to exist beyond my roles as wife, mother, and grandmother." She seemed momentarily taken aback by this simple statement of fact. How strange that my own daughter could be surprised by the notion that I had dimensions beyond my family functions. It confirmed how thoroughly I'd allowed myself to be flattened into a mere utility in their lives. I enrolled in watercolor classes that afternoon, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to noon. I also joined the community center's book club, which met every second Wednesday evening. Simple commitments, but they represented something profound: the reclamation of time that was truly mine. The first watercolor class was a revelation. 20 seniors arranged at tables in a sunny room, blank paper before us, brushes in hand. Our instructor, Gabriella, was a retired art teacher with silver-streaked black hair and an infectious enthusiasm for color theory. "Watercolor forgives nothing and reveals everything," she announced as she demonstrated basic techniques. "Every hesitation, every bold stroke, the paper remembers it all. But that's the beauty. We learn to work with our mistakes, incorporate them into something unexpected and beautiful." I found myself nodding, struck by how perfectly her words applied to my current life situation. Every mistake I'd made in allowing Eliza and Marcus to diminish me was visible in our current dynamics. But perhaps those very mistakes could be incorporated, into something new and unexpectedly beautiful. My first painting was objectively terrible, a lopsided attempt at the bowl of fruit Gabriella had arranged as our subject. But the process of creating it had awakened something dormant. The careful attention to light and shadow, the meditative quality of brushstrokes, the surprising ways colors blended on wet paper. "Not bad for a first attempt," said the woman next to me, Irene, a retired librarian with bright eyes and a geometric scarf. "You've got a good sense of composition." "That's generous," I laughed. "I think my apple looks more like a tomato with an identity crisis." "Well, tomorrow it might look like a proper apple. That's the journey." She studied me with friendly curiosity. "You're new to the center, aren't you? I don't think I've seen you at events before." "Yes, just getting involved," I confirmed. "I'm Martha, from Willowbrook Estates." "Irene, Pleasant Pines Apartments." She gestured toward her painting, a surprisingly skillful rendering of the fruit bowl. "Third year of classes. It gets easier. I promise." That simple exchange blossomed into an invitation to join Irene and a few others for coffee after class. I accepted without hesitation, texting Eliza that I wouldn't be home until early afternoon. No explanation or apology, just information. The Rao coffee shop was a charming, independent place I'd driven past countless times but never entered. We claimed a round table by the window, and I found myself surrounded by new acquaintances eager to welcome me into their circle. Besides Irene, there was Leonard, a retired high school science teacher with a dry wit and immaculate bow tie. Marianne, who had run a florist shop for 40 years and now judged regional competitions. And Roger, a widower like me who volunteered at the local animal shelter. "Martha's dealing with adult children who've overstayed their welcome," Irene explained to the group after drawing the basic outline of my situation from me. I'd been surprisingly forthcoming, perhaps because these strangers offered what my family hadn't recently: genuine interest in my experience. "Been there?" Leonard nodded sympathetically. "My son moved back after his divorce. Claimed it would be 2 weeks. Stayed 18 months. "What did you do?" I asked, genuinely curious. He smiled mischievously. "Started cooking exclusively with ingredients he detests: cabbage, liver, blue cheese. He found an apartment within 3 weeks." We all laughed, but beneath the humor was a current of understanding. Each of them had faced some version of my struggle: the challenge of maintaining boundaries with adult children, the process of redefining identity after retirement or widowhood, the delicate balance between family obligation and self-preservation. "The dark trick," Marianne offered, stirring her tea thoughtfully, "is remembering that loving your family doesn't require sacrificing yourself. Took me 6 decades to learn that one." I returned to the condo that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in months, perhaps years. My terrible watercolor painting tucked in my bag, phone numbers from 4 new friends in my contacts, plans for a museum outing the following week penciled in my calendar. Small things, perhaps, but they represented a world expanding rather than contracting. Marcus noticed the change immediately. "You seem different," he observed cautiously when we crossed paths in the kitchen that evening. "Do I?" I replied, arranging my newly purchased art supplies on a small shelf I'd cleared. Brushes, paints, a proper watercolor pad. Simple treasures that were wholly mine. More, I don't know, engaged? He seemed genuinely perplexed, as if trying to diagnose an unfamiliar condition. "I am engaged," I confirmed, "with my own interests and an expanding social circle." He processed this information with visible confusion, as if the concept of me having a life beyond their needs was somehow destabilizing. "Eliza mentioned you joined some art class. Watercolor painting," I corrected, "and a book club, and quite possibly the Historical Society's architectural walking tours." I smiled pleasantly. "My schedule's filling up quite nicely." What I didn't articulate was how these activities served dual purposes. Yes, they genuinely interested me and enriched my life, but they also strategically reduced my availability for the childcare and household management that Eliza and Marcus had come to depend on. Each class, each social engagement, each new commitment gently but firmly pushed them toward self-sufficiency. The watercolor classes quickly became the highlight of my week. Under Gabriella's patient guidance, my lumpy fruits evolved into recognizable shapes with decent dimensionality. More importantly, the classroom became a sanctuary where I was valued for my perspectives and contributions rather than my usefulness as a caretaker. "You've got a good eye for composition," Gabriella told me after the third session, studying my still imperfect but improving work. "You naturally create balance, even if your technique is still developing." Balance. What a concept. I was creating it on paper while simultaneously reconstructing it in my life. The book club proved equally rewarding. The first meeting featured a lively discussion of Louise Penny's latest mystery novel. I hadn't read fiction in years, not since caring for Harold during his illness, then being absorbed into Eliza's family needs. The intellectual stimulation of analyzing characters and debating plot points awakened neural pathways long dormant. "What did you think of the protagonist's decision in the final chapter?" asked the discussion leader, a retired English professor named Howard. I surprised myself with a thoughtful analysis that connected the character's choice to themes of loyalty and self-preservation running throughout the novel. The parallel to my own situation wasn't lost on me, but the theoretical distance allowed for clarity I sometimes struggled to achieve when thinking about my personal circumstances. Howard nodded appreciatively. "Excellent observation, Martha. You've identified a subtlety many readers miss. That simple academic validation, being recognized for my thoughts rather than my caregiving, felt like rain on parched soil." I left the meeting with the next book already in hand, eager to continue the intellectual journey. As my outer world expanded, so did my inner confidence. I began wearing colors again, the bright blues and greens that Harold had always encouraged, instead of the muted beiges and grays I'd adopted in my diminished role. I scheduled a proper haircut at a salon instead of the quick trims I'd given myself for economy. Small acts of self-reclamation that reflected the larger transformation underway. At home, the atmosphere remained cool but mostly civil. Eliza and Marcus maintained they were actively house hunting, though concrete evidence remained scarce. I didn't press the issue yet. The interim agreement had a clear end date, and I was documenting everything meticulously as my attorney had advised. The most noticeable change came in my relationship with Connor and Lily. Without the burden of being their default caretaker, I found more genuine connections with them. Our interactions became quality time rather than obligatory supervision. "Can I see your paintings, Grandma?" Lily asked one afternoon, peering curiously at my art supplies. "Of course," I said, showing her my practice pieces. The progressively less lopsided fruit, attempts at landscape, studies of light and shadow. Her eyes widened with genuine admiration. "These are beautiful. Will you teach me?" That simple request led to Saturday morning painting sessions with both grandchildren at the kitchen table. Connor proved to have a meticulous attention to detail, while Lily approached the medium with bold, expressive strokes. Watching them discover the joy of creation brought a different kind of fulfillment than preparing their snacks or helping with homework ever had. "You're good with them," Irene observed when I mentioned these sessions during coffee after class, "but now it's on your terms, not as a default responsibility. That's the difference." She was right. I loved my grandchildren no less than before, perhaps even more profoundly now that our relationship existed on its own merit, rather than as an extension of household management. "I'm learning," I told her, "that reclaiming myself doesn't mean loving them less. It means loving more authentically." This personal renaissance wasn't without challenges. Marcus grew increasingly distant as his influence over me diminished. Eliza oscillated between resentment and awkward attempts to connect with the more independent version of her mother. But with each class, each social outing, each small act of self-determination, I felt more solidly anchored in my own worth. Was becoming more than grandmother, more than widow, more than backdrop to others' lives. I was becoming Martha again. Not returning to who I'd been before, but evolving into someone new yet authentically mine. 3 weeks into our new arrangement, the facade began to crack. I was preparing for a community center field trip, a visit to the botanical gardens with my growing circle of friends, when Eliza cornered me in the kitchen. "We need to talk about the housing situation," she said, her voice tense. "It's not working out as we hoped." I looked up from packing my small lunch cooler. "Have you been unable to find suitable options? The rental market can be challenging, but I've seen several promising listings in the newspaper." "That's not the issue," she replied, irritation seeping into her tone. "The issue is that what you're asking is financially impossible for us right now. Marcus's firm had layoffs last quarter. His commissions are down. We were counting on staying here until things stabilized." This was new information, or at least newly admitted information. I considered her words carefully, noting what wasn't being said as much as what was. "I see," I replied evenly. "And when did these financial difficulties begin?" She shifted uncomfortably. "A few months ago, before we moved in." "So the basement flood?" Her gaze dropped. "There was a small water issue, but it was resolved quickly. We exaggerated the timeline." The confirmation of what I'd long suspected didn't surprise me, but the blatant admission still stung. My own daughter had deliberately deceived me, planning, from the beginning, to use my home as a financial safety net rather than temporary emergency housing. "Why not simply explain your situation honestly?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the hurt and anger simmering beneath. "I might have been willing to help under transparent circumstances." "Would you have?" she challenged, looking up with sudden intensity. "Or would you have lectured us about financial responsibility and living within our means, like Dad always did?" The mention of Harold caught me off guard. "Your father believed in financial prudence, yes. He worked hard to ensure we didn't face exactly this kind of insecurity. Not everyone has Dad's perfect financial discipline," she snapped. "Some of us have real-world challenges. Childcare costs, student loans, a housing market that's impossible to break into." "I understand life is expensive," I acknowledged. "But deception isn't the answer, Eliza. Especially not with family." She laughed bitterly. "Says the woman who disappeared for weeks, then came back with eviction notices and legal documents." "I left because I felt cornered and used," I replied, my composure beginning to fray. "And I returned with legal protection because I couldn't trust you and Marcus to respect my boundaries without it." We stood in tense silence, the truth finally emerging from beneath months of polite fictions and strategic maneuvers. Part of me felt vindicated, my suspicions confirmed, my protective measures justified. But another part mourned what this revelation said about how thoroughly our relationship had deteriorated. "What happens now?" Eliza finally asked, her voice smaller. "That depends on whether we can establish honest communication moving forward," I said, "beginning with a complete picture of your financial situation and realistic housing plans." She nodded reluctantly. "We should include Marcus in that conversation." "Yes," I agreed. "Tonight, after the children are in bed, I went on my botanical gardens trip as planned, though the morning's confrontation cast a shadow over what should have been a purely enjoyable outing. Irene noticed my distraction as we wandered among spectacular orchid displays. "Family troubles?" she guessed, linking, her arm companionably through mine. "The truth is finally emerging," I confirmed. "It's both a relief and a new complication." "Truth usually is," she said sagely. "Liberating and messy all at once." That evening, after Lily and Connor were tucked in, the three of us gathered at the dining table. The atmosphere was tense but less hostile than I'd anticipated. Perhaps we were all tired of maintaining the charade. Marcus had prepared financial statements, printouts of bank accounts, credit card balances, income projections. The picture they painted was concerning, though not catastrophic. His income had indeed decreased significantly, though they were far from destitute. Poor financial management rather than actual poverty seemed to be the primary issue. "We should have been up front from the beginning," Marcus admitted, looking genuinely contrite. "The plan was to stay just a month or two until my next big commission came through. Then things got comfortable. Easy. For you," I pointed out. "Not for me." "Fair enough," he conceded. "We took advantage of your generosity." Eliza seemed less willing to accept full responsibility. "We were desperate, Mom, and you seemed happy to have us here, to be part of the children's daily lives." "I was happy to be involved with my grandchildren," I clarified, "but not at the cost of being disregarded in my own home. Not at the cost of being treated as the household help rather than its owner." "We didn't see it that way," she protested. "Exactly the problem," I replied. "You didn't see me at all. Not as a person with needs and boundaries, just as a convenient resource." Marcus intervened before Eliza could respond defensively. "Martha's right, Eliza. We've been taking her for granted. The question is where we go from here." I studied them, both, weighing options and potential paths forward. The interim agreement had another 2 weeks before the move-out deadline, a deadline they clearly wouldn't meet given their financial situation. I could enforce it legally, but that would likely sever what remained of my relationship with my daughter's family. Or I could extend flexibility, but risk falling back into exploitation if new boundaries weren't clearly established. "I need to know what you're actually proposing," I said finally. "Not vague reassurances, a concrete plan with timeline and terms." They exchanged glances, and then Marcus spoke. "We've been looking at apartments in Ridgewood Heights. More affordable than this area, still decent schools. We could manage it by September when Marcus's summer bonus comes through. In the meantime, we could pay formal rent here, modest but fair." "And household responsibilities?" I pressed. "I'm not returning to the role of full-time unpaid housekeeper and childcare provider." "We could hire a part-time sitter for after-school hours," Eliza suggested, "and establish a fair division of household duties with a proper schedule." I considered their proposal. September was 3 months away, longer than I'd hoped, but with a definite end date and formal compensation in the interim. More importantly, the power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. We were negotiating as equals rather than their dictating terms or manipulating my emotions. "I'll need this in writing," I said. "A formal lease agreement with clear terms and the September move-out date specified as non-negotiable." "That's reasonable," Marcus agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly. "We can draft something tomorrow." "My attorney will review it," I added, watching their expressions carefully. "And I'll need to see documentation of your apartment applications in Ridgewood as evidence of good faith." A flicker of something, frustration, concern, crossed Eliza's face before she nodded. "Fine, we'll compile everything." "One more thing," I said, meeting their gazes directly. "I want to know the real reason behind Marcus's questions about my life insurance and financial arrangements." That wasn't casual conversation. The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of tension across the table. Marcus shifted uncomfortably while Eliza suddenly became very interested in a loose thread on her sleeve. It was a legitimate financial planning question, Marcus attempted weakly. "The truth, please," I insisted. "We're past the point of convenient fictions." Eliza sighed, finally looking up. "We were struggling with the down payment for a house. The market keeps getting more expensive, and we thought—" She trailed off, seemingly unable to complete the sentence. "You thought I might contribute," I finished for her. "Or that my policies might eventually provide those funds." "Not in a morbid way," Marcus hastened to clarify, though his discomfort was palpable. More like advance estate planning. "Let me be absolutely clear," I said, my voice steady despite the hurt their admission caused. "My financial resources, current and future, are designated for my needs and security, not as a housing fund for your family. I've worked too hard and too long to jeopardize my own stability." The nakedness of this boundary, the explicit denial of what they'd clearly been counting on, hung in the air between us. In their expressions, I could see them recalculating, adjusting to this definitive closing of a door they'd assumed would remain perpetually open. "We understand," Marcus finally said. And for once, I believed him. "Do we have an agreement in principle then?" I asked. "A formal lease through September, proper compensation, shared household responsibilities, and complete transparency about your housing search and financial situation moving forward?" They both nodded, the fight seemingly gone out of them as reality finally set in. This wasn't a negotiation they could manipulate or navigate around. This was acceptance of a new reality where I held firm boundaries, and they respected them, or faced consequences. After they retired to the bedroom, my former bedroom, I sat alone in the living room processing the evening's revelations. The truth had finally emerged, ugly but necessary. The fantasy of perfect family harmony had been replaced by something more complicated, but ultimately healthier. Clear expectations, honest communication, and mutual respect born of standing my ground rather than perpetual accommodation. I texted Patricia a brief update. "Truth finally surfaced, negotiated new terms. We'll call tomorrow with details." Her response came immediately. "Proud of you. The journey from doormat to doorholder is the hardest one we make. Sleep well, warrior." I smiled at her dramatic phrasing, but she wasn't wrong. I had transformed from someone whose boundaries were routinely trampled to someone who determined who could enter my life and on what terms. The shift hadn't happened overnight, and it wasn't yet complete, but its foundation was now firmly established. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself humming softly, a habit I'd abandoned during the months of tension. The melody was an old favorite of Harold's, something he'd often whistled while puttering in the garage or working in the yard. For the first time in a long while, the memory brought comfort rather than pain. He would have approved of my stand, I felt certain. Not out of animosity toward Eliza, whom he had adored, but out of belief in the dignity of clear boundaries and honest dealings. "I'm finding my way, Harold," I whispered to the quiet room. "It's not the path I expected, but I'm finding it all the same." The formal lease agreement changed the atmosphere in the condo considerably. With expectations clearly documented and signed by all parties, the ambiguity that had bred tension was largely eliminated. We weren't a harmonious family unit, perhaps we never truly had been, but we were functioning with a new kind of clarity that felt like progress. Marcus and Eliza paid the first month's rent on time, a modest sum that acknowledged both their financial constraints and the family connection. They hired a college student named Amber to watch the children 3 afternoons a week, allowing me to maintain my classes and social engagements without guilt or negotiation. A household chore chart, Eliza's creation, reminiscent of the responsibility systems she'd grown up with, hung on the refrigerator, with tasks fairly divided among the adults. Most significantly, they began actively pursuing apartments in Ridgewood Heights. I accompanied them to view a promising 2-bedroom unit in a well-maintained complex with a small playground and community pool. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and within their adjusted budget. "What do you think?" Eliza asked as we toured the second bedroom, which would be shared by Connor and Lily. Her tone suggested my opinion still mattered, perhaps now more than when she'd been taking my generosity for granted. "It has potential," I said honestly. "The layout is efficient, and that built-in bookshelf would be perfect for the children's collections." She nodded, studying the space with a mixture of resignation and practical assessment. It's smaller than what they're used to at your place. Children adapt, I reminded her gently. Remember that tiny bedroom you had when we first moved to Oak Ridge? You turned it into a wonderland with just a few posters and string lights. She smiled faintly at the memory. I covered every inch of wall with magazine cutouts. You never complained about the tape marks. Your space was your own, I said. That mattered more than perfect walls. A moment of genuine connection flickered between us, mother and daughter remembering a simpler time before financial pressures and adult complications had strained our relationship. I treasured it without trying to overinterpret its significance. Small steps, gradual healing. They submitted an application for the apartment that afternoon. The property manager, impressed by Marcus's credit score despite their current financial challenges, promised to expedite the review process. A tentative move-in date was set for early September, contingent on background checks and finalized paperwork. On the drive home, Eliza was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the passenger window as suburban landscapes rolled by. Finally, she spoke without turning. I never thought we'd be starting over in a place like that. Not at our age, with established careers and 2 children. I heard the complex emotions in her voice: embarrassment, disappointment, a touch of self-pity. But I also recognized an opportunity for growth that hadn't existed when they'd been focusing on manipulating me rather than addressing their own challenges. Starting over isn't failure, I offered. It's recalibration. Your father and I downsized twice during our marriage when circumstances required it. She turned, surprised. You did? I only remember the house in Oak Ridge. Before you were born, we lived in a studio apartment above a noisy deli. Harold's first teaching position paid barely enough for rent and groceries. Later, when the recession hit in the 80s, we sold our first house and moved to that small rental on Maple Street. You were about 4, probably too young to remember. I had no idea, she said quietly. We didn't discuss financial struggles with you when you were young, I explained. Perhaps that was a disservice. You never saw the sacrifices and adjustments behind the stability we eventually achieved. She was silent again, absorbing this, new perspective on her childhood and her parents. After a few minutes, she asked, "How did you handle the setbacks without resenting each other?" The question revealed more about her current marriage than my past one, but I answered thoughtfully. We reminded ourselves that financial challenges were external problems we faced together, not flaws in each other. And we maintained certain principles regardless of our circumstances, living within our means, saving something even when it seemed impossible, never compromising our integrity for quick solutions. We pulled into the Willowbrook parking lot before she could respond, but I noticed her expression had shifted from resignation to something more contemplative. The conversation hadn't magically solved their financial issues or completely healed our relationship, but it had opened a door to more authentic communication. That evening, I joined the Silver Pines Justice League for dinner at Patricia's apartment. The gathering had become a bi-weekly tradition, a forum for updates, advice, and the special camaraderie that comes from supporting each other through challenges. I shared the latest developments over Patricia's famous lasagna and Robert's carefully selected wine. So they're actually following through with the apartment search, Vivian noted with mild surprise. Progress. Significant progress, Eleanor agreed. Though I still recommend caution until the moving truck is loaded. I sense a shift in Eliza, I said, trying to articulate the subtle change I'd observed. Less entitlement, more reflection. She seemed genuinely surprised to learn that Harold and I had faced our own financial struggles. The myth of effortless parental success, Robert nodded knowingly. We all perpetuate it to some degree, wanting to shield our children from worry. Then they hit their own inevitable challenges and feel uniquely failing. The apartment application is concrete evidence, I acknowledged. But what feels more significant is the quality of our interactions. There's a different kind of recognition happening, of me as a person with my own history and agency, not just a convenient resource. That's the real victory, Patricia declared, raising her glass in a toast. Not just their departure from your space, but their recognition of your personhood. The others joined the toast, their faces reflecting genuine pleasure in my progress. These people, who had entered my life during crisis and stayed to become true friends, understood what this evolution meant. Not triumph over my family, but restoration of proper balance and respect within it. The following week brought another unexpected form of recognition from a different quarter. Connor's elementary school was hosting a special persons art exhibition, where students displayed works inspired by important figures in their lives. Eliza mentioned it casually over breakfast. "Connor wants you to come see his project," she said. "It's Thursday evening at 7. "Of course I'll be there," I agreed, touched by the invitation but curious about its delivery through Eliza rather than directly from Connor. "He's been very secretive about it," she added with a slight smile. "Wouldn't even let me help with supplies." Thursday evening found us all at Westfield Elementary, navigating crowded hallways decorated with children's artwork. Connor ran ahead, eager to show us his display in the third grade section. When we located his assigned space, I stopped short, in surprise. The artwork was a watercolor painting, unmistakably influenced by our Saturday morning sessions, though executed with a child's developing skills. It depicted two figures seated at an easel, both with paintbrushes. The backgrounds were washed in gentle blues and greens that bled into each other in the distinctive way watercolors merge on wet paper. Below the painting, Connor had written, in careful block letters, "My grandma Martha taught me how to paint with watercolors. She shows me that it's never too late to learn something new." Tears sprang to my eyes before I could prevent them. This simple recognition from my grandson, seeing me not just as the provider of snacks and clean laundry, but as a mentor, an artist, a person still growing and learning, touched something profound within me. "Do you like it, Grandma?" Connor asked anxiously. "I tried to do the colors like you showed me." "It's beautiful," I assured him, crouching to his level despite my arthritic knees. "The best watercolor I've ever seen." His face lit up with pride. "Mrs. Abernathy said I captured emotional resonance, whatever that means." "It means you painted not just what things look like, but how they feel," I explained. "That's very advanced." Eliza stood slightly behind us, watching this exchange with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. When Connor ran off to show his father the refreshment table, she moved closer to examine the painting. "I didn't realize how much these art sessions meant to him," she said quietly. "To both of us," I acknowledged. She studied the painting another moment, then turned to me with unexpected sincerity. "Thank you for giving him something I couldn't. A different kind of connection, a different kind of learning." The acknowledgement, so simple, yet so meaningful, settled between us like a gentle weight. For perhaps the first time since Harold's passing, she was seeing me as someone with unique gifts to offer, not just as an extension of her needs or a solution to her problems. "You're his mother," I said gently. "You give him what he needs most every day. But children benefit from many kinds of love and learning." She nodded, and for a brief moment I glimpsed the thoughtful girl she'd once been, before adult pressures and financial stress had hardened her edges. The recognition in her eyes wasn't just of my relationship with Connor, but perhaps also of the mother I'd been to her. Imperfect but devoted, firm but loving. As we moved through the exhibition, viewing other children's work and accepting compliments, on Connor's painting, I felt something shift subtly in our family dynamic. Not a dramatic transformation, but a quiet recalibration. In recognizing my value beyond convenience, they were beginning to see me as I truly was. Not just grandmother, not just homeowner, not just potential financial safety net, but Martha. A woman with skills to teach, stories to share, and a life still unfolding in meaningful ways. That recognition, From Connor's painting, from Eliza's acknowledgement, even from Marcus's more respectful distance, felt like the first fragile bridge, being rebuilt across the chasm that had opened between us. Not a return to what was, but the tentative beginning of what might be. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than exploitation, on seeing each other clearly rather than through the distorted lens of need and obligation. August arrived, with a heat wave that made the condo feel smaller than ever. Despite improved relations, the physical constraints of 4 adults and 2 children sharing a space designed for 1 or 2 created inevitable friction. The apartment in Ridgewood Heights had been approved, the final paperwork signed, security deposit paid, September 1st move-in date confirmed. But that still left 3 weeks of cohabitation during the hottest month of the year. I found myself spending more time at the Maple Lake cottage, initially for day trips and eventually for weekend stays. The small cabin, once a bittersweet reminder of Harold's absence, now represented a sanctuary of possibility. With each visit, I brought supplies to improve its livability: better linens, updated kitchenware, a small but efficient window air conditioner for the bedroom. "Are you thinking of moving here permanently?" Robert asked when he and Vivian joined me for a weekend visit. We sat on the weathered dock, feet dangling in the cool lake water, watching sunset paint the sky in spectacular oranges and pinks. "I'm considering it," I admitted, "at least seasonally. The winters would be challenging without significant upgrades, but spring through fall could work." "It's peaceful," Vivian observed, surveying the tranquil water and surrounding pines. "But isolated. Would you be comfortable with the distance from your support network?" "That's my primary hesitation," I acknowledged. "But Willowbrook doesn't quite feel like home anymore. Too many memories of feeling diminished there." Robert nodded understanding. "Sometimes a fresh start in a familiar place offers the best of both worlds. You have history here, but not the recent painful kind." His insight resonated deeply. The cottage held memories of happier times: summer vacations when Eliza was young, weekend getaways with Harold, peaceful mornings fishing from this very dock. It represented a connection to my past without the shadows that now tinted my condo. The next day, I placed a call to Gregory Winters, my attorney, and asked him to research what would be involved in making the cottage my primary residence. While the legalities were straightforward, he raised practical considerations about accessibility, healthcare proximity, and winter isolation that I needed to address before making such a significant change. "Perhaps a gradual transition," he suggested. "Maintain the condo while testing longer stays at the lake. See how it feels in different seasons before committing fully." His advice was sound, and I found myself deeply appreciative of having professional counsel who treated my decisions with respect rather than paternalism. Another measure of how far I'd come from the woman who had allowed others to make choices about her life without consultation. Back at Willowbrook, packing boxes began appearing in corners of the condo as Eliza and Marcus prepared for their move. The children's reactions were mixed: excitement about the community pool at the new apartment complex, anxiety about changing schools, sadness about leaving the familiar neighborhood. I found myself in the unexpected role of stability anchor during this transition. "Will you still teach me painting when we move?" Connor asked one Saturday morning as we worked on watercolor landscapes at the kitchen table. "Of course," I assured him. "We can have special painting days when you visit, or I could come to your new place sometimes." He considered this seriously. "It won't be the same, though. Not like now." "Change doesn't have to mean loss," I told him, gently guiding his brush to create the illusion of distant mountains. "It often means making room for new experiences alongside the things we want to keep." He nodded, absorbing this concept with the remarkable adaptability of children. "Maybe we could FaceTime for painting lessons sometimes," he suggested. "Dad showed me how it works on his phone." "That's a wonderful idea," I agreed, touched by his desire to maintain our connection. Technology can help us stay close even when we're not in the same house. Later that day, I overheard Connor explaining this plan to Eliza as she sorted through clothing to donate before the move. "Grandma and I are going to do FaceTime painting lessons," he announced proudly. "And sometimes, she'll visit our new apartment for real lessons too." "That sounds nice," Eliza replied, her tone warmer than I might have expected months ago. "We'll make sure to set aside a good spot for painting at the new place." Their conversation continued, but what struck me most was what wasn't said. No dismissal of the idea, no subtle undermining of my role in Connor's life, no suggestion that my visits might be inconvenient. Simply acceptance that our relationship would continue despite the changing living arrangements. That evening, Marcus approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Martha, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I nodded, curious about his serious demeanor. We stepped out onto the small balcony where a few resilient potted herbs survived the August heat. "I want to apologize," he began, his gaze direct but uncomfortable. "Not just for the obvious things, moving in under false pretenses, overstaying our welcome, but for something more specific." I waited, giving him space to continue without interruption. "The life insurance questions," he said finally. "They weren't just casual conversation. I was exploring whether your policies might potentially help with our housing situation. It was inappropriate and, frankly, disrespectful." The straightforward acknowledgement surprised me. In all our recent negotiations and interactions, this particular transgression had remained largely unaddressed beyond brief mentions. "I appreciate your honesty," I said after a moment. "May I ask what prompted this apology now?" He looked slightly embarrassed. "The financial literacy course I've been taking, part of our new budgeting plan. The instructor discussed ethics in financial planning, including the exploitation of older family members." He shook his head ruefully. Hearing it described so clinically made me recognize exactly what I'd been doing. To you, to our relationship, to my own integrity. The admission wasn't elegant or particularly poetic, but it was authentic. Marcus wasn't a villain in a melodrama, but a flawed person who had made poor choices under financial pressure. His recognition of those choices, not just as practical mistakes but as ethical failures, suggested genuine growth. "Thank you," I said simply. "I appreciate your self-awareness." "For what it's worth," he added, "I've set up college funds for the kids with automatic monthly contributions. Small amounts for now, but consistent. No more magical thinking about windfalls or inheritances." I nodded, acknowledging this concrete step toward responsible financial planning. They'll benefit more from that example than from any amount of money that might come without effort or planning. As August progressed, preparations for the move became more concrete. I found myself helping in selective ways, offering storage, containers, suggesting efficient packing methods, occasionally watching the children while Eliza and Marcus made trips to donate items or purchase supplies for the new apartment. Not from obligation or manipulation, but from the choice to support a necessary transition that would ultimately benefit all of us. One evening, as Eliza labeled boxes in the living room, she looked up with an expression of sudden realization. "You're being kinder about this move than we deserve," she said candidly. "After everything." "Kindness isn't always about what people deserve," I replied, continuing to wrap picture frames in protective paper. "Sometimes it's about who you want to be in difficult situations." She was quiet for a moment, her marker poised over a box. "I've been thinking about what you said about you and Dad facing financial setbacks, how you handled them together." She hesitated, then continued with unusual vulnerability. "Marcus and I haven't been good partners during this challenge. We've blamed each other, hidden things, made desperate decisions that just made everything worse. Financial stress tests even the strongest relationships," I observed, careful not to sound preachy or judgmental. The question is what you learn from the experience. "I think we're learning," she said quietly. "Slowly and painfully, but learning." The conversation shifted to practical matters of moving logistics, but something significant had transpired. My daughter had voiced a self-awareness that suggested growth beyond the immediate housing crisis. Whether this insight would translate to lasting change remained to be seen, but the potential was there. A small seedling of wisdom that might, with care, develop into something sturdy and sustaining. The final week of August brought a flurry of activity. The moving truck was scheduled, change of address forms submitted, final walkthrough of the Ridgewood apartment completed. Amid this productive chaos, I maintained my own routines: watercolor classes, book club meetings, mourning, coffee with Irene and our growing circle of friends. The Martha who had emerged from this challenging season was neither defined solely by family obligations nor completely separated from them, but existing in a healthier balance. On the evening before moving day, I surprised everyone by arranging a special dinner, not cooked by me as would have been expected months ago, but catered from a local restaurant that specialized in family-style Italian cuisine. We gathered around the dining table, which had been cleared of packing supplies for this final meal together. "A toast," I offered, raising my glass of sparkling cider. "To new beginnings. Yours in Ridgewood, mine here at Willowbrook. May we all find what we need in our respective spaces. And to family," Eliza added unexpectedly. "That can grow stronger through challenges when there's truth and respect." Marcus nodded his agreement, while the children clinked their glasses enthusiastically, more excited about the special occasion than its significance. As we shared lasagna and tiramisu, conversation flowed more easily than it had in months, perhaps because the pressure of indefinite cohabitation had been lifted, perhaps because we'd all grown in different ways through this difficult period. We discussed practical matters of the move, but also hopes for the future and commitments to regular family gatherings that would bring us together on healthier terms. Later, as I prepared for bed in my rightfully reclaimed master bedroom, I found a small package resting on my pillow. Inside was a framed photograph, not a family portrait as might have been expected, but a professional print of the lake view from my cottage dock, captured at sunset when the water reflected golden light. A small card in Eliza's handwriting read simply, "For your sanctuary, may it bring peace and possibility." The thoughtfulness of the gift, acknowledging my independent life and desires rather than defining me solely through family connection, felt like the culmination of our journey together. Not a perfect resolution or fairy tale ending, but a realistic new beginning based on mutual recognition and respect. I placed the photograph on my nightstand where it caught the soft lamplight, the golden water seeming to glow from within. Tomorrow would bring the practical challenges of the actual move, but tonight offered a moment of quiet appreciation for how far we'd all come since that afternoon when Marcus handed me a glass of water and asked about my life insurance. The question had been a violation that revealed the unhealthy dynamics undermining our family. But in confronting that reality, we had found a path towards something more authentic and sustainable. Not what any of us had initially expected or planned, but perhaps what we all truly needed. Moving day arrived with the characteristic commotion of any family relocation: last-minute packing, forgotten items discovered in odd corners, the children's mixture of excitement and apprehension. The moving truck, smaller than might be expected for a family of 4, reflected their more modest circumstances as they transitioned to the Ridgewood apartment. I found myself in an unexpected role, neither the anxious, accommodating grandmother, desperate to maintain family connections at any cost, nor the rigid enforcer of boundaries with no flexibility for genuine need. Instead, I occupied a middle ground of supportive detachment, helping where appropriate without assuming responsibility for the move's success. "You don't need to help with this," Eliza protested when she found me carefully wrapping her mother's china, pieces I'd given her years ago that had remained stored in my cabinets throughout their stay. I want to, I replied simply. These pieces matter to both of us. She studied me for a moment, then nodded her acceptance of this small kindness offered freely rather than extracted through obligation. We worked side by side, newspaper crackling as we wrapped each plate and bowl, the silence between us comfortable rather than strained. I was angry at first, she admitted as we sealed the box. When you came back with boundaries and legal documents, I felt like you were choosing yourself over us, over family. I continued labeling the box, giving her space to continue. But I think I understand now, she said. You weren't choosing against family. You were choosing against exploitation. There's a difference. I looked up, meeting her gaze directly. Yes, there is. I'm not sure I would have had the courage to do what you did, she continued. To stand up to your own daughter and son-in-law. To risk being the bad guy in order to restore proper balance. It wasn't about courage initially, I acknowledged. It was about survival. I felt myself disappearing in my own home, my own life. Only later did it become about creating something healthier for all of us. She absorbed this, then asked the question that perhaps had been lingering beneath many of our interactions. Are we okay, Mom? As mother and daughter? The directness of her query deserved equal candor in response. We're healing, I said after a thoughtful pause. Not back to where we were. That's not possible or even desirable. But moving toward something more authentic, more balanced. She nodded, accepting this realistic assessment rather than seeking false reassurance. Another measure of growth, her willingness to exist in the complexity of imperfect reconciliation, rather than demanding the comfort of pretended harmony. By mid-afternoon, the moving truck was loaded, final items stashed in the back of Marcus's SUV. The children hugged me tightly, Connor extracting a firm promise about our first FaceTime painting. Lesson scheduled for the following weekend. Lily pressed a slightly crumpled drawing into my hands, a childish but recognizable portrait of me standing beside an easel. For your refrigerator, she instructed solemnly. So you remember us. As if I could forget, I assured her, kissing the top of her head. Besides, I'll be visiting your new home soon to see how you've arranged your bedroom. Marcus approached last, his handshake formal but his expression earnest. Thank you, Martha, for everything, including the hard lessons. I accepted his gratitude with a simple nod, our relationship having evolved into something built on clearer expectations and mutual respect, if not the warmth of true family connection. And then, finally, Eliza. We stood facing each other in the doorway that had been the site of so many comings and goings over the past year, her initial arrival with talk of temporary arrangements, my departure seeking sanctuary at Patricia's, my return with newfound clarity and boundaries. I kept so many things from you, she said quietly. About our financial situation. About my fears for the future. I thought I was protecting you, but really, I was avoiding accountability. And I kept things from you, I acknowledged. My feelings of being used. My resentments. My growing unhappiness with the arrangement. Neither approach served us well. We're going to do better, she promised. With honest communication, with appropriate boundaries, with respect for each other's separate lives while maintaining meaningful connection. I believe you, I said, and realized with mild surprise that I genuinely did. Not with blind faith, but with the cautious optimism that comes from witnessing actual evidence of change. We embraced. Not the desperate clutching of someone fearing abandonment, nor the stiff formality of damaged relationships beyond repair, but the genuine connection of two adults navigating complex family dynamics with newfound wisdom. Then they were gone, the SUV following the moving truck down the street and around the corner. I stood in the doorway a moment longer, absorbing the sudden quiet of my condo. Not lonely silence, but peaceful solitude. The space was mine again, physically, emotionally, spiritually. That evening, my Justice League gathered at my condo for a small celebration. Patricia brought champagne. Robert arrived with a houseplant, a symbol of new growth, he explained with his characteristic blend of practicality and sentiment. Vivian contributed a homemade quiche, while Eleanor presented me with a beautiful, leather-bound journal. For the next chapter, she said, her eyes twinkling, we toasted to boundaries maintained, dignity restored, and lessons learned. But most of all, we celebrated the emergence of a Martha who had discovered her own worth beyond caregiving roles, a woman who could love her family without diminishing herself in the process. What happens now? Patricia asked as we settled into the living room, which already looked and felt different with the family's belongings removed. With the cottage possibility and your relationship with Eliza going forward? I'm taking Gregory's advice about a gradual transition, I explained. I'll spend more time at the cottage through fall, then return here for winter while making necessary improvements for potential full-time living next year. And your family? Vivian inquired gently. We've scheduled regular visits, Sunday dinners, twice monthly special occasions, school events I want to attend, but as grandmother, not as built-in childcare provider or household manager. Balance, Robert nodded approvingly. The hardest thing to achieve but the most sustainable long-term? I couldn't have done it without all of you, I acknowledged, looking around at these dear friends who had entered my life when I most needed support and guidance. You saw my worth when I had forgotten it. We just reminded you, Patricia corrected with characteristic bluntness. The worth was always there, just buried under years of accommodation and self-neglect. The month following their departure brought another surprising development. During our regular check-in call, Gregory Winters mentioned that he was expanding his practice to include more comprehensive elder care planning. Actually, Martha, he said, your situation inspired part of this initiative. I've encountered many clients in similar circumstances, capable seniors whose autonomy is undermined by well-meaning but ultimately controlling family members. I'd like to develop better preventative approaches rather than just crisis intervention. That sounds valuable, I agreed. I was wondering, he continued, whether you might consider consulting occasionally. Nothing formal, just sharing your experience and insights when it might benefit others in similar situations. Your perspective as someone who successfully navigated these waters would be invaluable. The request caught me by surprise. I'm not sure what I could offer that you don't already know professionally. The lived experience, he explained. The emotional reality of having to assert boundaries with family. The practical strategies that worked. The warning signs you recognize in hindsight. I considered the possibility thoughtfully. The idea of transforming my difficult experience into something that might help others facing similar challenges held unexpected appeal. Not as a formal job or primary identity, but as an occasional contribution that gave meaning to what I'd endured. I'd be open to exploring that, I told him. By October, a new rhythm had established itself in my life. Regular, watercolor classes had advanced to a more specialized workshop where I was developing a distinct style focused on lakeside landscapes. My circle of friends had expanded, with weekly coffee dates and occasional theater outings. The cottage had received modest but meaningful improvements. Better insulation, updated plumbing, a small studio space for painting when weather prevented. Outdoor work, family connections continued on our new terms. Sunday dinners at their apartment twice monthly. FaceTime painting lessons with Connor every weekend, his skills developing impressively. Occasional shopping excursions with Lily, who had discovered an interest in fashion design and valued my feedback on color combinations. Even Marcus maintained appropriate contact, consulting me respectfully on education options for the children or neighborhood resources in their new community. Most significantly, Eliza and I were discovering a relationship based on mutual respect rather than unspoken expectations and resentments. We still occasionally stumbled into old patterns, her subtle attempts to extract more involvement than I wished to provide, my moments of excessive rigidity when flexibility might have served better. But we addressed these missteps directly, rather than allowing them to fester, each conversation building our capacity for authentic connection. On a crisp November morning, I sat on the cottage dock wrapped in a warm sweater, coffee mug warming my hands as I watched mist rise from the lake surface. My phone chimed with a text message from Patricia. "Thinking of you today. 1 year since Marcus asked about the life insurance. Look how far you've come." I smiled at her characteristic directness and perfect memory for significant dates. She was right. It had been almost exactly a year since that pivotal moment when a seemingly casual question revealed deeper currents of exploitation and entitlement. The journey from that afternoon to this peaceful morning had been neither straightforward nor easy. It had required confronting painful truths, establishing difficult boundaries, and reimagining family connections I had once thought immutable. Yet here I was, not diminished by the experience, but expanded, not isolated by my boundaries, but protected by them, not defined solely by family roles, but enriched by them alongside other meaningful identities and connections. The lake stretched before me, reflecting the clear autumn sky and surrounding trees with their brilliant foliage. In a few hours, I would pack my weekend bag and return to Willowbrook, where tomorrow I would meet with one of Gregory's clients, a widower whose adult son had gradually taken control of his finances under the guise of helping. I would share my experience, not as an expert with perfect solutions, but as someone who had walked a similar path and found her way to solid ground. Next weekend, Eliza and the children would visit the cottage for the first time, experiencing this sanctuary that had become increasingly central to my life and future plans. I felt no anxiety about their visit, no fear that their presence would somehow reclaim territory I had established as my own. We had all learned too much for that old dynamic to reassert itself. I sipped my coffee, watching a blue heron wade deliberately through the shallows at the lake's edge. Patient, focused, completely itself. The past year had taught me to recognize and value my own essential nature in much the same way, not through dramatic gestures or performative strength, but through the quiet, consistent holding of necessary boundaries. A simple glass of water and a question about life insurance had revealed how thoroughly I had allowed myself to become invisible in my own life. The painful journey that followed had restored not just my home and independence, but something far more precious, the recognition that my worth existed independent of my utility to others, even those I loved most deeply. As I gathered my mug and sketchbook to head inside, I paused for one more look at the tranquil scene before me. Not every story needed a dramatic conclusion or perfect resolution. Some, like mine, simply required finding a new equilibrium, a sustainable balance between connection and autonomy, between giving and receiving, between loving others and honoring oneself. The path forward wasn't perfect or without challenges, but it was authentically mine. And that, I had finally learned, made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.